Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to discuss Saturn's entrance into Aquarius. Welcome Saturn into Aquarius for the next few years. And we're also going to go over a few horary charts, including two charts where we found or located a missing toy. There's some really fun stories that go along along with those charts. One is Strawberry Baby, my daughter's toy, which if you guys listen to my channel, you know that we went missing, cast a horary, couldn't find it for a while. We finally did find it, and the horary was just spot on. And then a student in my class who lost her son lost a toy. The toy's name is Big Woody. So we're going to locate Big Woody later. And then there's another really good horary chart that we're going to look at around pregnancy. So that's our agenda for the day. This will be a little bit of a recap on Saturn and Aquarius because I did a 4-part series on the Great Conjunction, included a lot on Saturn and Aquarius. I did some videos last spring. If you go back to my archives and look into last spring, you'll see some videos on Saturn into Aquarius as well. So that's where we're heading for today. Meanwhile, we are well on our way in this year's Kickstarter to our stretch goal of 1,000 backers. We're now as of recording this reading or this video today, we're at 749 backers, and we're trying to get to 1,000. That's our stretch goal this year. Can we do it? Last year we made our stretch goal. This is totally setting the standard for next year. However high we get next year, that's what we're trying to. This year, that's what we're trying to beat next year. So. When you donate, you can find the link in the comments section. When you donate, you can pick up readings, different kinds of readings that I offer. Some of them are sold out now. Different recordings on special topics, special lectures that I don't give anywhere else. And then also half off to all of my classes, my year 1 program, my year 2 program, my horary program. So take advantage of that while it's still there. We've got 16 days left to go. We're just going to see how close we can get to 1,000 backers. All right, so let's just bring up the real-time clock for a second and give you guys a look at Saturn's entrance into Aquarius. It is happening in the midst of some powerful aspects today from the moon. I always pay attention to little things like that. Okay, here's the real-time clock. So you can see that the moon today, actually, let me put in the outers. I was looking without them, but let me put them back. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and what you're going to see is that the moon is getting into the conjunction with Pluto today, then moving through conjunction to Jupiter and Saturn as Saturn is changing signs. So when is that going to happen? You got to go forward till this evening, and you're going to see that it changes over into late this evening. You're going to see it go. This is Central Time, right before midnight Central Time. It pops over, so it'll be technically into tomorrow East Coast time and earlier in the evening if you're on the West Coast in the United States. But there it is. It's making its turn, and right as it makes that turn, look at what happens. The moon eclipses it. Moon goes right between it. Now, what's so nice about this is that Stephen Forrest mentioned this. I saw this on Facebook yesterday, that this is an early crescent moon, right? So, and I hadn't thought of this, but it's a great point that he made, which is that early crescent moon is going to make for a very, very beautiful viewing of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And so if you can, we'll just back this up just a little bit. You can imagine the sun sets, and for a little bit, you'd be able to see that that moon kind of rising up, and it'll be on display. Now, you're going to see this, you can see the crescent moon, in the next couple of days, probably becoming a little bit more vivid as it gains a little bit more distance from the sun, say into Thursday. See, right here's the early waxing crescent moon, and it's going to be hanging right around the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the sky. That'll be in the western sky just after sunset. So check that out over the next few days. It should make for some very beautiful viewing. Anyway, the fact that the moon is moving through conjunction with Pluto, conjunction with fallen Jupiter, conjunction with Saturn, and Saturn is changing signs. The moon's just separating from a square to Mars right now. It's a little bit of a triggery day. I feel like today is the kind of day where I'm going to be on guard for reactivity within myself. Knowing that the grahas, the planets, the grabbers can very easily sort of grab our consciousness and use us in a sense. We can either be, completely identified with the unfolding of material energies, or we can participate consciously. It's always a choice. And this is was one of those days where the energies are going to be quite strong. Plutonian, deep, intense, maybe heated, a little volatile or explosive with Mars in the mix, but also potentially purgative, something that brings up energies or pent up energies from below the surface and allows them to be released, perhaps in cleansing or purifying ways, but also potentially volatile. So you have to watch for that today. Anyway, so then Saturn makes its turn over tonight into the sign of Aquarius. I thought it would be fun to just revisit some of the basic details about Saturn in Aquarius and a few time periods when Saturn last entered Aquarius. So, first of all, Saturn has two domiciles or home temples, one being Capricorn and one being Aquarius. In ancient astrology, the sun and the moon represent the quintessential masculine and feminine, and their domiciles are the sort of quintessential masculine and feminine, and they don't rule any other signs. Every other planet is expresses both a yin and yang side, a masculine and feminine side. And of course, they move. All planets, in a sense, are moving across the spectrum as they move through the zodiac. So, because we alternate signs in the zodiac between the masculine or diurnal and the nocturnal or feminine, and it's a beautiful metaphysics, a beautiful metaphysic underlying the whole system. When Saturn is in the sign of Capricorn, it's in its feminine sign. When it's in the sign of Aquarius, you get a more masculine version of Saturn. Now, the way that I've discussed that for a long time, and I feel that it's a fairly simple but effective way of thinking about it, is that the Saturn in Capricorn tends to, like clay or earth, tends to receive what is impressed upon it and form and shape something according to what's impressed upon it, like a receptive medium. And in this way, you'll often see an emphasis of discipline, habit, routine, practice, forming or making or building things, and manifestation of forms in the world. Sometimes also a clinging to familiar forms from the past, whether that's spiritual or intellectual or political. That it's not that inherently Capricorn is about the past, but it rather, there's a sense of familiarity with forms and reliance upon the familiar forms of the past. Whereas in Aquarius, you get that double. And Saturn, to be clear, is not just about the past. A lot of people think that, but Saturn has a lot to do also with the future. And in Aquarius, you're going to get a little bit more of that. You've got a masculine, airy, lighter, more assertive, outgoing Saturn in a sense. And that tends to be, rather than about conforming to something in the past or upholding something or forming habits that can last and endure a long time. There's a lot of other things we could say, but rather than those qualities, which seem to be more commonplace in Capricorn, you get this emphasis on what is the new form that we're pushing toward as an ideal in the future somewhere, whether it's technological or political or social or cultural. There's some sense of progress. And also, whereas Capricorn is very earthy and literally has a lot to do with this earth, Aquarius has a lot to do with the sky and space and expanding our horizons in a sense. We've already said a lot. I did a video, and it was sort of just for fun, but also really serious in that this is a sign that can get us closer to understanding the universe, to space travel, to the reality of other forms of life in the universe. Someone in the comments section recommended a documentary, or no, it was one of my students who recommended a documentary called The Phenomenon. So I watched it last night, and I couldn't believe, this was crazy, by the way. I have to tell you guys the story. So I'm watching this documentary on, basically it was a documentary about UFOs, and especially the history of the government's knowledge of UFOs. We mentioned that when Saturn entered Aquarius last spring, there was a big release of information from the U.S. government about the history of UFOs. But one of the government officials in this movie, and this was like an elected official, was saying that still the vast majority of what we know is not disclosed to the public. And that's someone who knows enough to say that, right? Who actually has the authority to say that. He's not just, I think it's easy to imagine that the people who chase UFOs are just like a zany bunch or something. But no, this is really legitimate. And I know that some people watching this will be like, yeah, welcome to reality. We've known this for 20 years or something like that. But a lot of people don't know that, right? A lot of people don't know about the reality of these things. I'll never forget when I was, and I've said this before, but when I was in many ayahuasca ceremonies in the middle of the Peruvian Amazon, that the shamans there were very familiar with extra dimensional beings. And they're, I don't know what else you could call them, aliens, angels, not all good, just as diverse as New York City. So you walk into New York City and you think, oh, everyone's going to be the same, or they're all the same kinds of citizens. But as anyone knows who's been to New York City, it's a melting pot of diversity, cultures, languages, shops, people, etc. And it feels to me like, space is like that too. And if there's any sign that would sort of awaken our understanding that we're sort of cosmic citizens and that there's lots of different species out there, it would be Aquarius. Anyway, this documentary was great. I really enjoyed it. So I'd recommend checking out if you're into that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm sitting there last night and watching this documentary, and this huge bird, and I think we have eagles right around the lake that we live near, and I think it might have been an eagle, but I couldn't see it. But this huge bird like swooped down. I just saw this massive thing like fly down. It was so creepy because I'm like sitting there watching, these kids from South Africa talking about how they saw an alien outside of their schoolyard or whatever, and this massive bird like flew down, and I thought it was either an eagle or an owl. It was so big. And I'm like, well, what does that in the middle of the night, right? And it swooped in to a tree outside of my house. And then I could barely get to sleep last night because I was thinking all about Twin Peaks. You guys ever see that show? So in Twin Peaks, it's like the owls are a big the owls are a big part of the story. I won't give it away because it's such a great show that I feel like everyone should see Twin Peaks. But the owls are definitely connected to to UFOs. So if I had my antennas up last night and some messengers from the spaceship came down to see what I was up to, then I feel very blessed and thank you. But at any rate, so that's one of the reasons, by the way, just as an aside, it's one of the reasons that I'm somewhat hesitant to myself. This is just me personally, to like dive too deeply into all of that. I saw it very clearly in ayahuasca ceremonies that there are beings of more than we can fathom in this universe. And because I saw that and it became real to me, it just scratched that itch, I guess, to know or to understand. And also made me realize that it's also like, it's just an extension of this world and the diversity of species and intentions that different groups of people have. And I don't, it struck me as really, I'm not saying I wouldn't be interested if aliens showed up and had something to say about the nature of reality. I'd be all ears, right? But it just struck me as something that I had to be careful of, because there was also this degree of what I noticed about that dimension of the visionary experience was that there was a degree of paranoia and fear and suspicion that seemed to go along with it. And also like that, those visionary spaces, when they opened up, seemed to also involve potential like invasiveness mentally and psychically with certain beings and dimensions. And so I was just like, I'm good. I'm fine. So more power to people who, have had different experiences or feel differently, but that was sort of how I felt about it. Anyway, all of this is just to say that you get that sense of there being a vaster, more distant reality that you're not quite aware of coming just right close to your face. In fact, one of the interesting things that they said in this documentary was that one of the repeated things was about the way that these UFOs moved and could change directions and fly really, really fast and lift and elevate and do all these things that like we clearly don't have the technology to do. So it couldn't have been man-made. And anyway, it was really fascinating. But I just thought, how Aquarian is this, where, Saturn is the dimmest, most distant planet. And so dim, distant, far away, sure, it can represent something that's lurking. It was associated with things that were deceitful, hidden, like a hidden assassin, or death, or decay, or something that's like decrepit or old, or, because it had this sort of dim, distant, far away kind of mood behind it, at least on the visible level of how the planetary symbolism was being derived. But what I find so interesting is that here it's associated with this lofty, airy Ganymede, who's up like a star. It's interesting that, like, and the potential also for people to get abducted or taken away, alien abductions, but not just that, almost like stars, bright stars that die young, that die too early or something like that. Like Marilyn Monroe died while Saturn was in Aquarius, if I'm not mistaken. I think Kurt Cobain might have as well, but someone could check me on that. Anyway, and by the way, I have some homework assignments today, because I for all of you, because I thought it would be fun. Can you also find any other bright, shining Ganymede-like stars? Now, Ganymede, remember, is the youth that's abducted by Zeus because of how beautiful and sort of special he is. He's brought up to Olympus to serve as the cupbearer to Zeus. And there's also a little homoeroticism in Aquarius, which I feel like could also be a big part of the themes in the next couple of years. But and that's because Zeus obviously is sort of having this homosexual, homoerotic relationship with Ganymede. At least that was speculated by some ancient writers. Anyway, that Ganymede theme of someone that's like an elevated star that's different from everyone else and untouchable somehow, but human still, but almost godlike. That theme seems to step up during the Saturn and Aquarius periods. And so, I think it's just one thing to be aware of. Like you have the idea of special sort of star children. It's almost like, I remember when there was a craze going on about indigo children, right? It's a very Aquarian idea because it has that kind of Ganymede myth associated with it. So anyway, Saturn in Aquarius, though, seems to speak to outsiders who are brilliant, distant star children, but also the fallen stars, the ones who aren't meant for this world somehow. That also there's a resonance there. So, in the meantime, watch also for questions about progress in the future. You get the sense that Saturn in Aquarius is more about asserting some kind of vision, or some futuristic sense of what's possible. And also you have to be really careful, because frankly, Saturn in Aquarius seems to enhance the intensity of ideology, and that can be really dangerous to basically to become an ideologue of some kind, and to dehumanize anyone who's on the other side of one's ideology. Radicalization of viewpoints, and I'm talking now across the spectrum. It's possible for anyone, really, of any camp whatsoever, to sort of become radicalized. I don't think that it's possible, by the way, to become a spiritual person in any of the great spiritual traditions of our planet, say Buddhism, or even Christianity, or the different yogic lineages, even shamanic traditions, and to a certain extent, I think any spiritual tradition that sort of requires a very deep level of commitment, there is a sense in which you have to become radicalized. Radicalized might be too intense a word, and I don't want to mingle it with extremists and fundamentalists and things like that. But what I mean is that, for example, in my own yoga practice, to understand that this material dimension is one of many, and to believe in the reality of Maya or samsara, the reality of the light of the soul, the need for the intervention of mantra in the form of mantra meditation to alchemize, and these things are like, they're either, you're either looking at it and you're going, that's all crazy, that's all totally bonkers, or somehow it really grabs your heart, it grabs your mind, and you buy in. So I don't mean to say that somehow we should all stay neutral and free of commitment. We all commit to something. In fact, it's impossible not to commit to something, even if we commit to the position of saying, well, I just don't know, right? It's still a kind of commitment that shapes how we live our lives and what we assume or don't assume about reality. I resist the explanation that sometimes is given that you can just walk around in this life like neutral. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says it's basically impossible to be neutral. Everyone acts according to their desires, and even if we don't know the truth about reality, we act, our desires and our actions in the world are informed by underlying, sometimes very unconscious beliefs about what is true, what is real, what is good, what is desirable. And I also feel like one of the things that I appreciate about Bhakti Yoga is that we say that, you know, rather than, or maybe I'll just put it this way, that you can't get out of having to question the nature of who you are, why you're here, because we're acting according to assumptions about who we are and why we're here and what is real all the time. And it's only when our assumptions start getting broken down, or we're not getting the results that we think we ought to get, or something about our paradigm is challenged, that we begin to question more deeply. And when we do, it's as though teachers arrive in our life. And I'm not saying there's just one path, right? But teachers start arriving in our lives, and we start to get glimpses of the truth that we're looking for. And usually it becomes impossible to not take steps forward or to evolve or change how we understand ourselves and reality. So one of the things I love about the sign of Aquarius, because I have a family full of Aquarians. My sister's an Aquarius, my dad's an Aquarius, my mom's an Aquarius moon, my grandmother was an Aquarius. So, and I've got I've got my midheaven on Aquarius. So one of the things that I love about the sign of Aquarius is that it gives us this desire to understand our place. It's as though we can feel alien in our own bodies, in our own lives, in our own social, in the social dimensions, and things that you might usually take for granted. Suddenly, it's as though there's a mark, over your life saying, like a big question mark, going like, "Are you sure? Like, what's really going on?" And the question, even just the questioning itself, starts opening doors, not all at once, not that we come to some one answer, but the questioning process about what's real and what is the greater reality that we're a part of, what is the greater purpose of our life. You see how that sense of that greater, that overarching, and that's the sort of airy, starry, distant Saturn. In ancient astrology, before Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto came in and started hoarding the market of a lot of different dimensions of astrology that are now assigned to those planets in modern astrology, Saturn held a lot of those meanings. Saturn was the one who took us beyond the status quo, like Uranus might. Saturn was the one that pointed toward the numinous, otherworldly, and invisible, and intangible and subtle, as Neptune might. And Saturn could also represent the darkness of death and old age and impermanence, as Pluto sometimes does. Now, they all have their unique attributes, but a lot of those attributes got put into, they got stripped a little bit from Saturn. And then unfortunately, Saturn ends up representing things like the past and tradition and conservative strictness or something like that. And it's just not nearly as diverse as Saturn was for several thousand years in the tradition. So when we say Saturn in Aquarius points us to a future, it's important that we recognize that, we're not to be an ideologue on the one hand, which would be someone who says, unless you're in my camp, you're just, your bottom line is you're evil or you're bad or you're other. And we can do that really in any dimension of our lives, political, philosophical, spiritual. We can demonize the other. On the other hand, Saturn in Aquarius can be the call to say, look, you are living your life according to assumptions about the nature of reality, about the nature of truth, about the nature of your own being. And it's better to be conscious about those and to question and understand them than to live in what we call the darkness of ignorance in the Bhagavad Gita, which means basically I'm living with a kind of inertia. I have views about reality. I'm just not aware of what they are, but I'm living my life according to them, whether I like it or not. So Aquarius has this ability to draw our gaze back to the vastness of things bigger than ourselves, and can draw us out of ignorance. They can also highlight this sense of not belonging or not fitting in or not knowing our place. And sometimes that plays out socially too, between groups that are marginalized and groups that aren't, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit about that. Now, how about some time periods? This is just kind of fun. And you see, when you look at the years in which Saturn ingresses into Aquarius in the past, you have one problem, which is that sometimes it's going to ingress like it did in 2020 and then back up through retrograde into Capricorn and then go back into Aquarius. So these are approximations of when Saturn enters and sort of enters to stay. So the most recent was in 1991. And just a little reminder of some of the things that happened in 1991. You had Operation Desert Storm in the Gulf War. And you also, let's see, you have the beginning basically of the Boris Yeltsin wins the first free elections for Russia's first popularly elected president. And a lot of people, we're going to mark that time as a sort of right around the end of the sort of the end of the Cold War, or the what am I thinking of? Beginning of the end of the what am I thinking of now? It wasn't the wall. When did the wall come down? I'm trying to remember when the wall came down. There's a big shift in the world relationships between the United States and the Soviet Union, and I'm just trying to, if anyone has a better memory than I do of 1991 around what was happening then, that would be great. At any rate, then you also have some other things that were happening. Let's see. After many years of apartheid in South Africa, a new constitution for multicultural society is formed. Notice the apartheid theme there. That's very Saturn and Aquarius. It's also the beginning of the Balkan Wars. And it's also the year that Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of the band Queen, dies. There's that Ganymede character, right? Very interesting. Notice some interesting technology. The airbag was invented, and also the web browser was invented. I've gone over some of that before. Now, if you go back in time previously to 1962, you get some other interesting events. You have the first transatlantic television signal. I think that's interesting, that technology theme again. The first Beatles single was released, and they're definitely Ganymede characters, those. And one of them dies, John Lennon, like in Ganymede sort of fashion. Marilyn Monroe is found dead. Cuban Missile Crisis takes world to the brink of war. John Glenn becomes first American to orbit the Earth, etc. So that's 1962. Now, if you go back in time to 1932, about 30 years previous, they're about 30-year cycles, right? Well, you're in the Great Depression, and unemployment reached 24%, with many living in cars and shanty towns. Mahatma Gandhi goes on a hunger strike. And there's another character that's very Ganymede-like who dies assassinated, right? And let's see. Roosevelt was elected that year as well. There's lots more that you could say about this. So this is my fun homework for all of you. I didn't have a lot of time to delve into this today, but what I wanted to ask you guys is, when you look at those years, what else do you find? 32, 62, and roughly 1991. So what do you guys find in those years, or any of the previous Saturn and Aquarius years, that strike you as very Aquarian? I would love to hear your thoughts and hear whatever research you're able to pull up, because it's probably better than mine, So at any rate, I'd love to hear from you guys on that. Okay, so I just wanted to do like a little bit of a refresher on Aquarius. I've probably done 5 or 6 videos at this point already on Saturn and Aquarius in the past year, so not super thorough, just a smattering of notes I wanted to re-emphasize. In particular, I'd also love to know if there's any shooting star, otherworldly personalities that were either born or or died maybe when Saturn was in Aquarius. That would be really interesting to find out. I listed some of the Saturn and Aquarius personalities during my 4-part series on the Great Conjunction, so you could check that out too. All right, so for closing today, I want to show you 3 horary charts. One is, will I get pregnant? And yes, you will. And yay, she did. So I'm going to show you how that chart worked. Where is Strawberry Baby? I'll show you that. And where is Big Woody? So those are the horary charts I'm going to put up next. By the way, when you contribute to my Kickstarter, you can also pick up half off tuition to my horary program, which starts again in June. You have to know aspects and dignities and house meanings to take that course. If you don't, then I recommend starting with my year 1 course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Okay, so I am going to put the real-time clock up on the screen again. And oops, here let's see. Will I become pregnant? We're going to do that one first. So here we go. All right, so there's a few interesting twists and turns in this one that I thought were fascinating. One is that you can see here that okay, first of all, I should back up for those of you who don't know horary. So this woman was asking, will I become pregnant? In a horary question like this, the chart is cast at the moment that she asks the question, the moment that I received it in email. I use the timestamp and cast the chart for that moment. It's a form of divination. The rising sign, the ruling planet, will represent the querent, the person asking the question. Here we have that as Mercury. Their co-signifying planet will be the moon. So they get those 2 planets and they become like actors on the stage. Then what we're going to do is look for pregnancy or baby, which in this case is going to be the 5th house ruler of pregnancy, which is Saturn. So what we need to see is an aspect forming between signifiers. We need to see mom coming to baby in order to say, yes, you will get pregnant. We need to see an aspect between the 2 of them. That's one of the main things that we do. Well, we have that exact thing happening as the moon is going right into a square with Saturn. Okay, but one thing that's really interesting about this horary is that you can see the main signifier is in its fall, and it is in the sign of Jupiter. And Mercury is in its fall in Pisces. That's our querent in the sign of Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is the ruler of the 7th house, which would be spouse, and Jupiter is in its fall in Capricorn. Now, one of the significations of Jupiter that's often used in horary astrology is that Jupiter also represents sperm. So you see our querent in the sign of her fall in Jupiter's sign, and Jupiter is also in its fall. And this could possibly be a sign of infertility, perhaps on the part of the husband. And that indeed was the case. So I was able to see that. And that was kind of a cool little detail of the horary that I was able to pick up on. And then you're going to see, however, that the moon does go to Saturn. And so I suggested, are you guys using any kind of infertility treatment? They, in fact, they were. And so they were able to become pregnant. And they're pregnant now with twins, in fact. One of the things that I found interesting about this, horary, given that there were twins in the picture, right? Is that Venus in this horary is also in the sign of the twins. And I couldn't say exactly what was going on here, but this certainly this struck me. And so I don't know, maybe there's horary astrologers out there that could make more sense of it than me. I didn't get twins out of this, but I did get the pregnancy. Anyway, so the moon goes to Saturn, and so she's pregnant with twins, and this was last April. And my sense, because the moon was in a pretty close and applying square with Saturn, was that it would be, fairly imminent, and it was. Now, one other thing about this horary that's interesting is that you could also speculate with the moon in its fall in Scorpio that mom was dealing with troubles or health problems or something like that. And of course, this in addition to her primary significator Mercury being in its fall is what tipped me off to the idea that there was something wrong, that they were trying, but there was something wrong already. Oftentimes when people ask, will I become pregnant? That's a possibility. They're asking because they've been struggling and wondering if they will ever get over get over that hump or whatever. And find that they're able to conceive. So in this case, fertility treatment worked, and they ended up getting pregnant. So I thought that was kind of a cool horary. I just heard back about it recently, so I thought I would share that one with you guys, especially the detail about her partner being having infertility issues. Another thing that's fascinating is that this person happens to be a Libra rising. By whole sign houses, that places the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in their 5th house. So that great conjunction is going to coincide with her having twins. Isn't that beautiful? Nice. So that's Will I Become Pregnant. Now I'm going to show you where Strawberry Baby was. And I should have actually gotten Strawberry Baby to show you on the video because it's so ridiculous. So where is Strawberry Baby? Okay, here you go. So this is this is a case of a missing toy. And Horary can actually be used to locate missing objects. This one's pretty, it blows my mind that we live in a universe where you can just consult the stars with a sincere heart and they'll give you a pattern and show you where your missing toy is, right? How beautiful is that? Okay, so this is where is my daughter's toy, Strawberry Baby? Well, my daughter is the 5th house. That's my child. I'm the 1st house. I'm Saturn. Capricorn's rising, so I'm Saturn. My daughter's going to be Venus, right? And then her toy is going to be the 2nd house from the 5th, which would be her object or her movable possession, which makes it the 6th house ruler, what we call a derived house ruler. So that's Mercury, because you can see Gemini's on the cusp of the 6th, which is the 2nd from her house. That means it's her 2nd house, her house of movable objects and possessions. That's Mercury. Well, I figured Mercury was probably pretty good for the doll, especially because Mercury is invisible, combust in its detriment under the beams of the sun, right? And so initially I was looking all over the house in an 11th house setting because I didn't think it was outside of the house. And this is where I went wrong because I just didn't even entertain the possibility that it could be in the yard or outside of the house somewhere because it's cold here in Minnesota right now. It's like not like they're outside playing with dolls. They're outside, going to the playground, stuff like that, but they're not bringing their dolls outside. So I was like, okay. Eventually, so I looked everywhere, in an 11th house setting, which is where you see Mercury, but under the beams of the sun, and possibly, under the beams of the sun near the gateway of the 12th house. So I was like, what in the world? Well, the one thing that the 11th house could signify would be like a place where you host friends, or maybe even a guest room, because it has the connotation of being a house of friends. So I was looking in those types of places. Now, it's in a double-bodied sign. When a missing object is in a double-bodied sign, it can mean that it's tucked inside of something, or that it's inside of a cupboard or on a shelf, tucked behind something, etc. So I thought, by the way, you will not believe how many times missing objects come up as Mercury combust, because Mercury combust means Mercury is invisible and potentially damaged or whatever, but it means it's invisible. It's hidden behind something, or it's something else is blocking it. I helped a student of mine locate a missing saxophone. He repairs children's instruments, and he was missing it in his shop somewhere, and it was combust the sun, and it in Aquarius. This was a couple of years ago, and it ended up like up high on a shelf, but behind something. Right, that's kind of that airy feeling. So with fire, you're thinking like a source of heat. And sometimes also the certain texts will say a source of heat or up against a wall, walls being used as as a source of shelter from the cold, or bricks being used as an example of things that were fired in a kiln, or like bricks that were made with fire or something like that. But at any rate, usually it's like source of heat, something like, but hidden, maybe blocked from something. And that maybe not always with the fire sign is it going to be about the heat. It's going to be something more about its combustion status, and therefore it's just invisible somewhere. It's hidden behind something. So anyway, in horary astrology, if it's not in the house, you can typically use directions. So this direction of the chart is going to be towards the east, and up here towards the top of the chart is going to be towards the south, towards the direction where we see the sun at high noon. And then over here is going to be the west. And then down at the bottom of the chart, you're going to get the north. Okay, so then if it's outside of the house, you can think about these directions. So between, like due east, southeast, I guess that would be. Someone correct me if I've got the wrong lingo. Someone in my class has a degree in geography, and they explained it to me once, but I was east, southeast. Is that how it is? Anyway, so I decided, maybe it was outside of the house, maybe in this type of direction. And that was my plan, was to go and look for it at the end of my workday. Well, my wife and kids beat me to it. They were outside on the deck, southeast of our house on the outside, a place where we host friends, and stuff like that. And there is a sandbox, and it's a stand up one. It's like a bin that goes right into like a little stand, so the kids can stand and play in this little sandbox. It had the lid on it. The lid somehow came off. Maybe one of the girls took it off or something. And so when they found Strawberry Baby, she was buried in the sand with like her little face and arms sticking up from under the sand, in the sandbox. And this is a place where, the sun is going to be basically right overhead on our deck. So there she was, buried in the desert, buried in the desert deck under the sunlight, and also inside of this little box. It was so remarkable because my kids say she was buried in the desert. So just profound. And just matched the symbolism really well. So did I find it based on the Horary? No, they ended up finding it, but it matched with the Horary so perfectly that I thought it would make for a fun video. So Strawberry Baby is safe. Now, one thing is that Strawberry Baby was a little dinged up because of getting sand all up in her little joints and everything like that. Someone recommended using a water pick for your teeth and seeing if we could get into the little cracks and get all the sand out and stuff like that. But a little bit dinged up, and that can be the case because Mercury's in its detriment and Mercury's under the beams, which could imply damaged. Okay, so finally, we're going to find Big Woody. So this is another mother with her child, and Big Woody. We're talking about Woody from Toy Story, for the record. Get your mind out of the gutter. And there's little Woody. They have one who's like a small toy version of Woody from Toy Story, and then they have a bigger version of Woody from Toy Story, and they had two. So the nickname the kids had for this Woody was Big Woody. Anyway, so same thing. Mama's looking for kids' toy, so it's second house from the fifth when she casts the chart, which happens to be ruled by Virgo, hence Mercury again. Same exact situation, right? But this time in the eighth house. So one thing about the eighth house is that it can represent like bathrooms or places associated with like evacuation or waste, and things like that. And at any rate, it was very close to a bathroom, if I'm remembering correctly. But right near the bathroom, there's a chest, and the chest is literally right below a heater. So that there's the heater, and there's like a vent or something coming out of a wall, and then right below it they have some special kind of heating system in their house, and there was this heater, and then right below it was like this little chest. And so she thought to flip open the chest, and sure enough, right below the heater, inside of the chest, was Woody. Now, here's the crazy thing. You can't make this stuff up. Here's K2 right there too, right? So K2 is the decapitated body of the demon, and in Vedic astrology. So I made the joke in class, like, oh, did you find him with his head cut off? Because obviously there's like just that K2 symbolism. And she was like, no, but his hat was missing and his head was banged up. So he got his normally attached hat. He's got the little cowboy hat. His normally attached hat had been taken off, and his head, the head was all banged up. And she believes it's because his head had gotten closed in the lid of the in the actual lid of the chest. So there's can you believe that? Like I thought it was just kind of be a funny joke, but no, there was actually like Woody almost got decapitated. That's the point. So and was a little nicked up on his head. So there you go. Really fascinating, right? Now, what makes missing item horaries so difficult is that if it's not contained to the house, it's a lot more difficult to find. If it is within the house, you'll find that that symbolism, because it's more contained, you know your house. For an astrologer like myself who doesn't know somebody's house, I find that doing missing items for in my own house is significantly easier than doing it for other people. I can tell them a list of different places to look, but would I have thought of the sandbox outside in that direction? No, because I was thinking inside, and then the sandbox out in the sun, buried in the sand, is so clever. But it's hard for me if I don't know somebody else's house to necessarily think of that either. And the other thing is, of course, that sometimes people will say, I haven't seen it for 2 years. Well, the likelihood is in a lot of horaries, it's very possible that the item is gone. And sometimes horary will give you a picture that the item is gone or dead or sort of beyond repair, or that you're not going to find it. And in some cases, you will find it. So sometimes there's testimony of recovery that says, yeah, here's where it likely is. And yes, you will find it. Other times it's just the location, and the horary isn't necessarily going to say, yes, you'll find it. It just says, here's where it is. Go find it if you want it. And then some horaries where it's not so clear cut. There's not a clear path of where to look, or if it's even capable of being found. So I've had a lot of success with missing object horaries over time, but almost always it's a technique that I find works better for the student of astrology to help them locate things within their own home that are missing. I did one time, and I've showed this in the past, I did help a farmer locate their missing bull. I've helped a lot of people locate things over time, but there's probably, I'd say my success rate with missing objects is like 40% or 30%, as opposed to my other horaries where, you're getting more like 70 to 80% of your questions right, because you have really a lot clearer path of delineation. And the missing objects in horary are like, definitely not a guarantee, right? So it's but it is really fun when you can actually do them, and they work out. And I've had lots of cases where they do. So, and I had a student recently who helped a woman locate a missing earring that she had lost while out on a walk, and she was able actually to tell her that it was probably near a church. And then she was like, "Oh yeah, well I walked by a church," and she went and found them. She went and found the missing earrings. So it can work outside of your home too, but it's a little bit more of a needle in a haystack at that point. Anyway, this is like really a fun, like I feel like my horary classes are like Hogwarts Academy. We're sitting in classes, and we're using astrology in a way that we're not used to using it, as a form of straight up question-based divination. It's a lot of fun. So if you ever get interested in it, come check it out. It's my most hands-on class. We basically solve horaries year round. So that's what I've got for you for today. We'll be back with more content as the week goes on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how Saturn in Aquarius is affecting you. Be sure to watch the house that it's ingressing into in your chart. Get a little action in those first few days when a planet ingresses into that whole sign, that sometimes will act as a foreshadow for what's to come. So I'd love to hear some of your reports on what's happening, and any other the fun homework that I gave. Hear what you guys have on that as well. I also appreciate your support with the Kickstarter. We're still trying to get to 1,000 backers for our stretch goal. Help me get there. Pick up a reward when you do. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.